welcome to Board Gems, my regular video series in which I go over older board game gems with you. And the game I'm covering this time came out around 2005, and the German name is Heckmeck and Bratwurmeck. I need to break that name down a bit, because there's a lot of stuff in that name. So I don't speak German. My understanding is a Heckmeck is like a commotion, you know, like making a big deal about something that maybe doesn't deserve a big deal, right? I'm making a fuss over something. Bratwurmeck, so you know bratwurst, right? So it's like a grilled or fried kind of sausage. So you can think of what a bratwurm is. It's that, but instead of a sausage, it's a worm. Yummy. And the ek at the end of that seems to indicate like it's a corner, right? Like a corner of a room would be the ek of that room. Presumably they just added that to make it rhyme. So Heckmeck and Bratwurmeck becomes like the commotion at the corner where the grilled worms are. For some reason, they didn't translate it directly when they made it into English. This is the English version, and there seems to be some debate as to how it's pronounced. I don't care what anyone says. I'm going to tell you right now to pronounce it Pickomino, not Pickomino. That drives me up the wall. It's Pickomino. It's obviously Pickomino because it comes with pieces that are like dominoes, like this one. It's a domino. It's like it's the same shape as a domino. It's a Pickomino. The pick is because there's a bunch of games in the series, the Zoch Chicken series, that also have the word pick in their name in the English translations, like Pick Picnic. I should do Pick Picnic sometime. Anyway, this one is from Rio Grande Games in English, right? Originally, it's published by Zoch. More recently, a Canadian distributor by the name of Lion Rampant takes a lot of the Zoch games and makes localized versions of them. They added a hyphen after the K, between the K and the O, and hopefully that's enough to indicate to everybody, it's like, yeah, you should be pronouncing it pick, and then the rest all together. Pick-omino. Okay? Now, it's designed by Rainer Knizia. It is published by Zoch, as I said originally. It is for 2 to 7 players. You can play this with 7. If you play this game once, do not play it with 7 players, okay? I would say for your first game, top out at max 5. I've played it in a family setting with 6 and 7 people, and it worked great. 3 generations of people at the table. Great game. It is a long, long time before your turn comes around again, but if you're having lots of conversation, doesn't matter, right? But if you're playing in a more like focused setting, like not as casual, but like you're playing a game and the game is Pickomino, let's play Pickomino. Yeah, maybe don't play with 6 or 7. It says ages 8 and up. That's quite fair. And the box says 20 to 30 minutes, which I think is pretty fair for the most part. This is, I think, pretty much, I think I can call this an evergreen. There's been lots of spin-offs and stuff that have come out. So I don't know if this is, I feel like this version was not always this big. I might be misremembering. I feel like there was a smaller version of this. This one is about the same size as the current Cosmos 2-player games. Thicker than the old Cosmos 2-player games. There was a spin-off, I think around, so this came out 2005. There was, in 2008, a spin-off called Sushi Zoch im Gockelwalk. And that is a game that's probably been one of the longest games on my wish list on BoardGameGeek. I had intended to buy that so long ago and never got around to it. And now you can't find it, but, you know, there's lots of games out there. You're going to miss some. So I think it was around 2009. That was the version I sought out. There was a version of this minimized into this tiny little tin. Look at this. Isn't this cute? It is so tiny. And they've shrunk all the components. I mean, the only components are dice and these thick domino tiles. So if I can show you the tiny tin, this is so cool. Check this out. See, look at that. They're so thin as to be, you know how like a Bible's pages are thinner than a normal page, such that in some you almost see them as like transparent. That's what this is like. This is the light just shines right through them. It's a very marvelous version, and the dice are very, very tiny as well. So it all fits in here very nicely. The only downside to this is the ink on one side of the dice. You can see this. This is the worm side of the die. And I don't know how well this shows up on camera, but it's quite faded. The pips are fine because the pips are recessed, but the worms aren't. And the worms started to fade on the dice very soon after I started playing it. There you go. I mean, in 2010, there was Heckmeck Jr., which is like a kid's version of Pickomino, which is funny because Pickomino, to some people, will probably already be a kid's game. It's not. It's a family game. One thing about Pickomino is there's a lot of math. It's a Knizia game. Everybody's going to say, oh, it's too mathy. Yes, there's lots of multiplication and addition in this game, which I don't mind. But if you want one that has the simpler math for younger kids, there is Heckmeck Jr. The sums don't go as high, and I don't think there's any multiplication. So, yeah, it's fine. It's a fine little game. And then there's also Heckmeck Barbecue, which is basically the board game version of Pickomino. Never played it, can't offer an opinion on it. Just a few years ago, actually, they came out with an expansion for Pick-omino called Extraverm. Don't think of the expansion as necessary. It'll add some extra powers, basically, and some variations, and it's neat. And if you get tired of regular Pick-omino, absolutely check it out. But don't think of it as a necessary expansion. Anyway, you can get the base game and the expansion together in like a tin. Why don't I show you how Pick-omino plays, and then let's talk more about why it's still a gem today. To set up the game, place the 16 worm tiles on the table between the players, and you can arrange them from lowest value to highest value, from 21 all the way up to 36. And you'll notice the different numbers of worms on the tiles. You're trying to get worms. At the end of the game, when all these tiles are gone, the player with the most worms wins. The game also comes with 8 dice, which are numbered 1 to 5, and instead of a 6, there's a worm. Pick a start player, play as clockwise. On a player's turn, they're going to take all 8 dice, roll them, and then choose any single value to keep. And you keep all the dice of that value. So based on this roll, you could keep the 2 3s, or the 2 4s, or the 1 5, or the 3 worms. In the end, you're trying to get a high score, a high value, and the worms count as value 5, but your end result has to have at least 1 worm. So actually rolling 3 worms is pretty darn good. And at any point you can stop or keep going. Now in order to stop, you need to be able to claim one of the tiles, either in the middle of the table or in front of another player. Right now, the total that's set aside is 15, because each of these worms is worth 5. It's not enough, so I would roll the rest of the dice. Now I cannot pick the worms again. I already have worms. I have to pick one of the other values. You always have to take all the dice of that value that you choose. 1, 4, or 5. Let's say I pick the 4. I'm at 19 now, so I'll keep rolling. Now I have no choice. I cannot take the worm, so instead I will keep the 3 ones. And now my total is 22. I can stop there and take the 22 tile. I take this and I put it face up in front of myself, and right now I have 1 worm. When my turn comes around again, if I'm able to claim a new tile, I would stack it on top of this tile, such that each player may have a stack of tiles in front of them. You can always take from the middle a worm tile of the same value you rolled, or lower. So if somebody has already claimed the 22, you could still take the 21. You can also steal a tile from another player. you can only steal the top tile from the stack. So if there's a sweet looking 36 here and there's 22 on top, you can only steal the player's 22. However, it will then expose the 36. Maybe somebody else can steal that. Every time you roll the dice, you have to set aside a new value. If I choose to keep rolling, and I roll a value that I've already set aside, I go bust. If they don't have any tiles in front of them, no harm, no foul. But if they have a tile in front of them, they would have to return it. If they have a stack of tiles, they take the topmost tile in their stack, they return it to the center of the table, and they take the highest valued tile and flip it over. Instead of taking a tile in the display, you can take the topmost tile in any other player's stack. However, you have to match the exact value. Whereas these ones, if I roll a 30 and there's no 30 and there's no 29, I can still take a 28. But to take a 30 in front of another player, I have to roll 30 exactly. You also go bust if you roll and your final roll that you've set aside has no worms. Every set of values you set aside must contain at least one worm in order for the roll to count. Keep playing clockwise until all the tiles are claimed or flipped over face down. The game ends, players count the numbers of worms on their tiles that they've collected, and the player with the most worms wins. In the case of a tie, the tied player who has the highest valued tile in their collection wins. That's it. You're ready to play Pickomino. Now, Pickomino is a great filler, and I want to qualify that statement a bit because at some point, because I got into the hobby around 2004, 2005, right? And the word filler was not used as a pejorative. It wasn't a negative thing. It was just a game that filled a gap. So it wasn't necessarily like you could play fillers your whole night. Nothing wrong with that, right? But if you had a big game and you finished up, maybe there was a second table at your game session and you're waiting for them to finish up, or maybe, some people are early, they just want to play a quick game while they're waiting for more people to show up. Just play a 20-minute game, right? And Pickomino can fill that niche. Nowadays, it seems like some people are treating the word filler as a pejorative, and I don't think that at all. It's just describing a type of game. It's a game that is pretty easy to jump into. Even ideally, you could jump in and out, which you could actually do with Pickomino. A player could drop out and the game would still work. Pickomino can sometimes feel long. For one thing, it's quite repetitive. Every turn you're doing the same thing. Every time you take a turn, you're rolling the dice, and each turn takes a while because you're re-rolling dice a couple times before you're dropping out, right? So the box says 20 to 30 minutes, which is pretty reasonable usually, but it can vary a bit. And one reason it can vary a bit is because you can steal tiles from other players, okay? So you have the tiles that are in the middle of the table, and mostly players are going for those, but if you roll an exact count, you're able to steal the matching tile from another player who has that tile on top of their stack. In a two-player game, it's actually not that interesting because there's only one other player that has that stack, so there's only one other person to steal from. And actually, in a two-player game, you can kind of get caught in an undertow. So what I mean by that is like when all the tiles in the center are kind of like the low tiles are kind of already taken and in everybody's stacks, and all that's left are high tiles, it's very easy to go bust. Let's say you go bust, you lose a tile, maybe it's a low tile, so that low tile goes back into the middle. And then the other player plays, now there's a low tile available, so they take that, and now it's your turn again, and there's no low tile for you. So, you try to roll high and you go bust again. That's what I mean by the undertow, right? Sometimes you can get caught in this kind of vicious cycle. And it's really only noticeable, I find, in a two-player game. A lot of people love a two-player, but it's not my top recommendation for two-player. Like, I I wouldn't seek this game out 2-player. It's fine. My son and I have played 2-player a lot, and it's fun and it's very short usually. But that's something to keep in mind. It's not as satisfying to me. 3 or 4 players is the sweet spot. You want there to be a few different piles to steal from. It makes it a little more likely, but too likely, and it slows the game down, because when you steal a tile from another player, the game doesn't progress to the ending. It doesn't get closer to ending. In theory, players could just steal tiles from each other, and the game will just keep going and going and going. And the more players there are, the more piles there are to steal from, so stealing becomes more common, and so the game slows down. So I would go so far as to say that if you're going to play this once, do not play it with 6 or 7 players. Top out at 5, maybe even 4. 5 is fine too. 4 players is probably perfect, for me at least. So 3 or 4, I know there's an app. I have it on my phone, the Pickomino app. And hey, if you want to see Doris Mateus's interpretation of Angela Merkel as a chicken, you should get the Pick-omino app, the Heckmeck app. You should definitely do that. And that one is only 2, 3, or 4 players. You can't go higher than that in the app. So 5 is kind of and 2 is fine. And then 6 or 7 is, again, I would avoid it unless you're in a setting where you're talking a lot, right? So like I said, I brought this, on a vacation. I was visiting my hometown, visiting my family in Halifax, and there were 3 generations at the table. There were 6 or 7 people, and it was lots of fun. And, we're talking a lot and chatting a lot, and, it's a great way to pass the time, right? When it's not your turn, you don't have anything to do, so you can chat with each other, and then once in a while somebody will steal a tile from you, and there's that moment of you're involved suddenly, and it's like, hey, what's going on here, right? So it just has that little bit of take that where you can kind of like, kind of thing, and it just makes the whole experience so much more fun. And even though the game is repetitive, you're doing the same thing every turn, but there's context, and a surprisingly large number of games, I won't give examples, but there's a surprisingly large number of games that don't get this message. If you have a repetitive game where every turn is basically very similar, you need to have overall context so that this turn feels different than the turn 2 turns ago and last turn, because the game state is different, the situation is different. And I love that about this game. Even though the game can be quite repetitive, what happens is that, let's say you get really lucky with a roll. You get a really great tile. Maybe it's like a 30 or something, so it's 3 worms. Maybe even it's a 33 or higher. It's 4 worms, right? Well, when your turn comes back around again, are you going to be risky again? Because if you go bust, you're going to lose this extremely valuable tile. So it's much more tempting, much more likely to, after you have a high tile, to try to get a low tile, because low tiles are easier, and then you kind of cover it up, right? So, okay, now the high tile is safe under there. Now there's a low tile, and when you have a low tile on top, you can be risky again, because if you go bust, you just lose a 1 worm tile, not a big deal, right? So you have that context. Every turn really depends a lot on what's your top tile. What do you have to lose? And it also matters what other players' top tiles are, because you can steal from them. It was quite a while playing Pick-omino before I found a way to kind of roll and keep dice, keeping open the possibility of stealing later. Because when you steal, you have to steal by exact count. And so it can be the case where somebody has a 26, they're winning, you probably want to steal from them. Right now you have an 18. Like if you take these dice, you have 18. It's not enough, but if you roll again, you don't have any 4s yet. If you roll again and get 2 4s, you got the 26, and then you're able to steal that from the other player. So leaving those options open, right? So that keeping dice not just to get the best roll possible, but also to leave open the possibility of maybe stealing if you get a lucky roll. The 4 worm tiles seem to be just there almost to tempt you, to tease you. Like, why can't you get this? You're not a very good Pickomino player. You could be getting this tile. Instead, you're settling for this. So it's just enough to kind of give you kind of tease you and kind of egg you on. It's like, oh, I could even get that much better tile. Those are usually only if you get like crazy lucky rolls, you're able to get a 4-worm tile. But as you play, and people sometimes go bust, those high tiles gradually start to deplete. And very possible that some of the low tiles start to deplete. So what you have is you have a lot of medium tiles. And it puts pressure on players to try to because you're not taking the low-hanging fruit anymore, right? The 21, 22, that's easy. People already have them. Maybe they're under the stack, so you can't steal them. So now it's like, okay, I need to get a 25, right? You're trying to push harder. And some of the high ones are still available. A lot of it is luck. It's a dice rolling game. You're not going to avoid that. But it is a really great push your luck element. It's like, oh, it's just all about lucky rolls. Yes, but you're leaving out the part where you're trying to increase or decrease your odds of getting certain lucky rolls, right? Is leaving open the possibility of getting a lucky roll. If you don't take 4s, if you don't take 5s early, later on you can get a lucky roll and get several 4s or 5s. And that's how you're getting those big rolls and claiming those big worm tiles. But yes, it is a lucky game. And it's super, super swingy, okay? Some players are going to have scores at the end of 11 and other players are going to be 2, right? And you can have great luck early in the game and have a big stack of tiles. You have tons of worms. And then later in the game, you're constantly going bust and you're losing all those tiles. Players are stealing from you. You're losing all those tiles. In the end, you have a score of 1, right? This game is like that. There's highs and lows. It's exciting, but it's super, super swingy, like many dice games are, so you have to be prepared for that. I find this game works a little bit better with complete non-gamers, right? Now, Ticket to Ride is one of the best board games of all time, as far as I'm concerned. You can play Ticket to Ride with non-gamers. You can introduce them. That's why we would call it a gateway game, right? It's a way to introduce people to board games, and then this jumping off point, maybe they'll explore further. I've had not as much success with Ticket to Ride as a gateway game than I have with Pick-omino as a gateway game. There are people whom I've taught board games to, and they bristled at some of the more common games that we would teach, and they had no problem with Pick-omino. And I will add that even though it's a bit of an older game, relatively recently, this would have been pre-pandemic, but not that much earlier than pandemic. So I don't know, 2018, 2019. Me and my game group, we hadn't gotten together in a long time, I think, if I remember correctly. And we were getting together in my restaurant and we were looking for a game to play. And I suggested this one because we have it at the restaurant and everybody had a blast. And you know what? There was like at least 2 tables of our group, right? We kind of split up. Later on, some of those people were playing games with different people, and they ended up playing Pick-omino, introducing it to them because they enjoyed it so much. It's like, oh, it's great and it's super easy to learn, and you have that interaction of the laughing when each player, steals from one another, and it just got a lot going for it in terms of a social experience. I can compare this game actually to a free game that Rainer Knizia has also designed, a free dice game called Decathlon. And all you need in Decathlon, I think, is 8 dice, which is how many dice are in this one. They're just slightly custom dice because the 6s are replaced with worms. So Decathlon, very similar feeling game. You're rolling the dice. Sometimes there's a little bit of a push your luck depending on the event that you're rolling dice for. But each event feels very slightly different. A great free dice game. If you got 8 6-sided dice sitting around, give it a try. The rules should be free online. You can even find on BoardGameGeek some little score sheets that players have made. Give that a try. And then afterwards, if you like Decathlon, maybe you're fine just to stick with Decathlon. But if you like Decathlon and you want to try a similar game, you should definitely check out Pickomino. I think this is a great game. There is no perfect edition. I mean, this one is too big. This one, you could argue, is too small, but the only problem I have with this one is the worms fade on the dice really, really quickly. But you can still find this around. I think Zoc made new versions just a few years ago, and I think maybe 999 Games, maybe, in the Netherlands, has their own tin as well, which is about the same size as this one. Maybe, I don't know, maybe slightly bigger. For me, this is the perfect size. I have a memory of Pick-omino existing in kind of this size. So the expansion, I have played the expansion a little bit, and it's fine. A lot of people, I think, if they look, I'll put it this way: if you love Pick-omino, you should probably check out the expansion, simply because it adds more variety. And it makes Pick-omino probably a better sell for gamers. Like, it takes what is a very simple family dice game, which some gamers might find a little repetitive, and adds more context. So I said earlier that the context matters. This roll is different from the last roll because now you have a different die on your stack, a different domino. So this adds more context. So there's these small wooden animal figures that can move around, that give special powers like an extra die, or there's a hen that sits on your stack to keep people from stealing from it. There's extra low dominoes, which you can get only by exact roll. And there's also the little domino tokens. I mean, they're the same material as dominoes, but I mean, they're little worm tokens, one worm each. And you can get that, for example, if you keep a roll that has more than one pip die in it. So if you take 2 ones or more at a single time, you get one of these for free, which is a nice little element to add, because normally you would not want to take more than 1 unless you're aiming for something, you're trying to steal a tile. So it's just little things like this. It adds some variety, but do not think of it as a necessary expansion. But for me, I'm happy to have it simply because of the smaller box. And I moved everything in this into this. Fits perfectly fine. And it's a nice small box for me to put on my shelf. Doesn't take up much space. You can get these two together as a tin. I think the tin is maybe about the size of this box. If you think you would definitely want the expansion, and you really, really care about the dominoes like matching in terms of their tint, then you almost have to get the tin, because this does not match this. Maybe this matches like later versions of this, I'm not sure. But this version that I have, the tiles don't match up. I don't really care, because I don't really use the expansion all that much anyway. I usually just prefer the base game. But if you have strong interest in the expansion, and if you really, really care about everything matching up, you may want to check out the tin. But this is what I did. Put the base game and the expansion in the expansion box, and I'm super happy with it. So I have a smaller version here, and I also have this extra small version here. So this is so great. Oh. This is a dice game that'll never leave my collection. Whether it's for you, obviously in the end that's up to you, right? Like, you have to see what I said and see what, how to play part, and decide if this is something that'll fit you. If you're a modern gamer, well, at least my experience is a lot of modern gamers would dismiss this as just some light family game, who cares? And I just feel that's so dismissive and reductive, because there's nothing wrong with a light family game, and there are light family games that you can sink your teeth into. This is not a super meaty experience, but it's not LCR either, okay? There are decisions to make. The decisions matter. It's a great design from Knizia, and it's one I'm very happy to have in my collection. Thanks for watching. Remember, older games like Heckmeck and Bratwurmeck. Pick-omino. Don't stop being good just because new games come out. All right? Take care.